My husband suggested we take a trip to a hot spring, intending it to be a relaxing getaway just for the two of us. I was excited at the thought of spending some quality time together. However, without informing me, my husband invited our son, Mike, and his wife, Jennifer, along. This was particularly troubling for me because I have a strained relationship with Jennifer, and this was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, not a source of stress. When we arrived at the hotel, Jennifer immediately confronted me, saying with a sneer, "If you dislike being with Mike and me so much, why don't you sleep in the parking lot or somewhere else?" Her mocking tone was cutting, and what made it worse was that neither my husband nor my son stepped in to defend me. They just stood there, silent, as if her words were acceptable. I reached my breaking point. I was furious and hurt, so I snapped, "Fine, do as you please. I'll be sleeping outside then. Goodbye," and stormed out of the hotel, getting into our rental car and driving away. I needed to clear my mind, so I wandered the streets until dawn. During my walk, I heard the distant sounds of sirens, and when I finally turned my phone back on, I was bombarded with missed calls from my husband and son. When I answered, my husband was frantic, demanding, "What the hell are you doing? How many times do you think we called and texted you?" They explained that a small fire scare had occurred at the hotel due to someone's carelessness, and they had been worried sick. Despite their panic, I was shocked and appalled that neither of them apologized for how Jennifer treated me or for the situation that had led to my walking out. I gave my husband one last chance, asking, "Hey, which is more important to you, Mike and his wife, or me?" Instead of addressing my feelings, he brushed off my question, saying, "What's with that all of a sudden? Is this really the time to be asking that? Just come back already." His response confirmed my worst fears, so I replied coldly, "I see. That's fine. After all, Mike is your child with that woman, anyway. It seems I'm no longer important to you." My husband and son were bewildered on the other end of the line, not understanding the weight of what I had just said. That was the moment I decided to reveal a deeply buried truth, one that had been quietly gnawing at our marriage for years. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Elizabeth, I'm 46 years old, and this year marks the 20th anniversary of my marriage to James. We both work at a hobby manufacturing company, with James in sales and me in accounting, a routine we've followed since we got married. We have a son, Mike, who has been a significant part of our lives, especially after marrying Jennifer, a woman he met during his university years. To outsiders, we might appear to be a typical, happy family, but in reality, we have been grappling with some serious issues beneath the surface. One day, after coming home from work, I was preparing dinner when I noticed James browsing something on the computer. Curious, I peeked over his shoulder and saw beautiful images of resorts and hot springs. I was immediately intrigued and leaned in closer, feeling a spark of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. James noticed my interest and turned to me with a smile, saying, "I've been thinking about planning a trip soon." "A trip? That sounds wonderful," I replied, unable to contain my excitement. We had both been so busy with work that we hadn't had a chance to relax or take a break in what felt like forever. "Don't you think it's about time we let loose a bit?" I asked, to which he agreed. We were fortunate that our work schedules were flexible enough to allow for time off outside of our busy seasons, and just the thought of the trip filled me with joy. However, underneath my excitement, there was something I had been hesitant to talk to James about. "The trip sounds great," I began, "but there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." "Hesitant about what?" "What is it?" he asked. "You know what I'm talking about. It's about Mike and Jennifer," I said, my mood darkening at the mention of our son and daughter-in-law. Ever since Mike entered junior high, he had grown distant and cold towards me. He would ignore my attempts to talk to him, often locking himself in his room or going out. On the rare occasions he did respond, it was with a curt, "It's nothing," or "Leave me alone." Sometimes, he was downright rude, demanding, "Hurry up with the food," or "Give me some pocket money." There were even times when I was locked out of the house, not just by the door, but by a chain gate. Initially, I thought it was just a phase of teenage rebellion, but as his harsh words and actions continued, I became increasingly concerned and turned to James for advice. But James dismissed my worries, saying, "Isn't that just a phase of rebellion or maybe just adolescence? You should understand that and deal with him properly as a mother." He showed little concern for the situation, leaving me to handle it on my own. Despite my efforts to reach out to Mike, his attitude remained unchanged. After moving into a dorm for high school and continuing on to university, he hardly ever returned home. Even after marrying Jennifer, I wasn't invited to their wedding, and my letters of congratulations went unanswered. When Mike finally brought Jennifer home to meet us, I immediately sensed that she and I were not going to get along. Her brightly dyed hair, heavy makeup, and flashy clothes made her stand out in a way that I found unsettling. In front of James and Mike, she acted perfectly polite, but the moment we were alone, she turned to me, glaring, and said, "I wondered what kind of woman Mike's mother would be, only to find out she's this plain. No wonder Mike detests you." Her words cut deeply, confirming my fears that she was indeed the perfect match for Mike, who had grown to be just as dismissive and harsh as she was. Despite their apparent compatibility, they seemed to live a carefree life without children, a detail that struck me as odd but fitting for the kind of relationship they had. From the moment they were introduced, Mike and Jennifer seemed to take an instant dislike to me, much like Mike had from the start. They began visiting our house frequently, usually accompanied by Mike, and each time, their presence was a source of discomfort. Whenever they were around, Mike and Jennifer would lounge around the house, hurling insults my way, and even staying for dinner, which I was left to prepare and clean up alone. They arrogantly demanded more drinks and snacks, leaving me no peace or respite. Their behavior was exhausting, and I rarely participated in their conversations, though one time, Jennifer condescendingly remarked, "Elizabeth, why do you even work after getting married? Spending hours surrounded by old men making toys?" I couldn't do that. Jennifer, who didn't work herself and was financially supported by Mike, had a habit of skipping jobs and likely wouldn't have lasted long in any position. Listening to her gleeful stories about abandoning past jobs, I sighed inwardly, unable to tolerate Mike and Jennifer's selfish and tyrannical behavior any longer. Frustrated, I sought advice from my husband, James. However, he simply shrugged and said, "Mike is still as rebellious as ever, but Jennifer isn't that bad, right?" Feeling miserable, I replied, "But I'm being treated like a maid by Jennifer. I have my own job, and my body can't handle the stress any longer." Despite my concerns, James would play dumb and brush it off, claiming he didn't know what to do. Eventually, Mike and Jennifer stopped visiting, though it wasn't clear whether they no longer wanted to see me or had other obligations like work or financial constraints. However, their absence from our home was a relief, though I could still sense that James continued to meet with them at times. Sometimes, when he came home, I could smell the faint scent of their perfume and cigarette smoke on him, which was particularly harmful to me as an asthmatic. Despite our strained relationship, I was relieved not to endure their unpleasant behavior any longer. Determined to protect our planned hot spring trip from their interference, I worked hard to convince James not to invite them. Relieved when he agreed, I eagerly looked forward to our trip to Hawaii. I spent hours poring over the guidebook, bought new clothes, and anticipated the vacation with great excitement. However, my excitement was shattered on the very first day when we arrived at the airport for our Hawaii-bound flight. As we pulled our suitcases towards the security check and prepared to pass through the ticket gates, I was stunned to hear familiar voices. I turned around to see Mike and Jennifer standing there. "What? Why are you here?" I asked in disbelief. "Did Dad tell you?" "We decided to come along to Hawaii," Mike replied casually. I was dumbfounded and turned to glare at James. He simply said, "Mike and Jennifer have always dreamed of going to Hawaii. I'll handle them, so please, let's go together." Despite all my efforts, including working hard and dieting for this trip, James had still prioritized Mike and Jennifer. Feeling utterly defeated, I decided there was no point in going to Hawaii with such unpleasant feelings. But just as I was about to turn back, Mike and Jennifer stopped me. "For the past 11 years, I've wanted to reconcile with you, Mom, but I couldn't bring myself to be honest about it," Mike said. "I know my behavior wasn't right, and I realize now that I've been awkward and unfair. I want to get along with you, Elizabeth, and I don't want to strain our relationship any further." I was taken aback. It was the first time Mike had shown such humility. Jennifer, too, seemed eager to avoid appearing as the villain. Reluctantly, I agreed to continue with the trip to Hawaii. On the plane, Mike and Jennifer were in high spirits, ordering and starting to drink alcohol, while James sat happily next to me. Despite their upbeat mood, I felt an odd sense of unease and tried to distract myself by gazing at the scenery outside the window. Upon arriving in Hawaii and renting a car, we started our trip based on the revised plan James had created on the plane. However, it wasn't long before Mike and Jennifer began to ignore my presence, speaking only to James. At water-based attractions like Sea Life Park and Waikiki Beach, they would intentionally trip me, causing me to fall and get soaked. At lunch, they pushed their leftovers onto me, among other forms of harassment. The tension escalated after dinner when Mike and Jennifer came to our hotel room, wanting to drink. When James went downstairs to get some snacks, Mike and Jennifer, who had bought alcohol in Hawaii, sat on my bed without asking. Mike pulled out an ashtray and a cigarette. "Hey, this is a non-smoking room." "Stop it, please," I said. "It's fine if we ventilate," Mike replied with an annoyed look, and Jennifer began to light a cigarette as well. Reaching my limit, I shouted, "Enough. Stop smoking in a non-smoking room. You'll get us thrown out if you don't follow the hotel's rules. What's with you all of a sudden? Mike retorted. I told you before that I have asthma and can't handle cigarette smoke. Please follow the hotel's rules, I said, struggling to keep my composure. Your serious motherly attitude has always been so irritating, Jennifer snapped. Smoking in a non-smoking room is the height of rudeness. God, you're so annoying. What's wrong with having fun on a trip? If you hate smoke so much, why don't you sleep in the parking lot or somewhere else? My head went blank from their words. Just then, James returned from his errand. Hey, it's loud even in the hallway. What's with all the shouting? He asked. I can't stand being with these two for another second, I said, my voice trembling with pent-up emotion. They're trying to smoke in a non-smoking room, and why did you bring them along despite me saying no? This is unbelievable. Tears welled up as my frustration finally overflowed. Mike and Jennifer looked down at me, smirking. You're just annoying, acting all high and mighty, Mike said with a smirk. You're no fun, not even drinking a single sip of alcohol. Something inside me snapped. Fine, I get it. I'd rather sleep outside than stay here. Bye. Hey, Elizabeth, James began, but I quickly gathered my valuables and phone and stormed out of the room. James tried to stop me by grabbing my arm, but I shook him off. Leave me alone. I want to be alone, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I hurried out of the hotel and made my way to the parking lot. There was no sign of James following me. I got into the rental car and drove around Hawaii at night, trying to clear my head. Despite my suspicions, Mike and Jennifer hadn't changed their attitude toward me. James had ignored my desperate pleas and brought Mike and Jennifer along on the trip without consulting me. This betrayal made it feel impossible to maintain any semblance of a family relationship after this trip, especially given the secret I had been keeping about James and Mike. As I thought about it more, a wave of anger and sadness overwhelmed me, so I decided to keep driving to calm down. Hawaii's beautiful night scenery gradually cooled my heated mind. Eventually, fatigue set in, and I parked the rental car in a coastal park to rest. I thought I heard sirens in the distance, but I was too exhausted to care and quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, dawn had broken, and the sparkling sea greeted me, soothing my spirits. I had breakfast at a seaside diner and then remembered to check my phone, which I had turned off before driving because I didn't want to hear from James or receive his texts. Feeling calmer, I turned on my phone and was shocked by the number of missed calls and texts. There were at least 30 or 40 of them, starting from around 11 o'clock the previous night. Just then, a call from James came in. What the hell are you doing? Do you know how many times we've tried to reach you? I've called and texted you. James's voice was a mix of anger and distress. What do you mean? I just had breakfast at a seaside diner, I replied, confused. While you're casually having breakfast, we're in deep trouble, Mike's irritated voice cut in. What trouble are you talking about? I asked, growing concerned. It's exactly as it sounds, James explained. After you left, we had a little party with cigarettes, alcohol, and snacks. Before we knew it, we fell asleep, and when we woke up, the room was filled with smoke. A fire? I asked, horrified. Yes, James confirmed. The cause was Mike and Jennifer's cigarettes not being fully extinguished. Thankfully, it was just a small fire, but the fire trucks arrived in droves, and everyone in the hotel had to evacuate. Now, we're being blamed for it. Jennifer suffered a minor burn and was taken to the hospital. Mike and I have to go to the police for questioning and apologize to the hotel staff. I realized that the sirens I heard last night must have been for that incident. I was stunned by their carelessness. Then, in his usual carefree and irresponsible manner, James said, "So, we're tied up here and can't leave. Can you go to the hospital and stay with Jennifer?" The lack of apology and his prioritization of Jennifer over me made it clear that some things would never change. I decided to give James one last chance. James, who is more important to you, me, or Mike and Jennifer? What? Why are you asking that now? This isn't the time, James replied, sounding bewildered. Well, I said, feeling completely disillusioned with James's attitude. Hey, what do you mean? Don't joke around at a time like this, James said, his frustration evident. Well, Mike is your child with that woman, and it seems I'm no longer in your thoughts, I said, as both James and Mike looked confused by my words. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to reveal the secret I had kept hidden. Mike, you are the child of your father and his mistress, I said firmly. Mike was stunned into silence, and James grew visibly agitated as I continued. 24 years ago, James had an affair with a woman who worked with us at the time. By the time I discovered the affair, she was already pregnant. She had the audacity to tell me, "I'll give you the child, so don't demand any compensation." I found her contemptible, but I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning the child, so I decided to raise you myself as my own, without seeking any compensation. The mistress was fired, and James's affair became known, but taking you in helped soften the blow. Despite not being biologically related, I raised you as my own. However, your rebellious phase began in middle school and only worsened over time, which I initially thought was normal adolescent behavior. As the years went by, your attitude grew increasingly challenging. Realizing you were indeed the child of James and his mistress, I was torn between the affection I had developed for you and the harsh reality. Mike, still in shock, shouted through the phone, "That can't be true. I can't just be some bastard child." "I have proof of your father's affair," I said. "I keep it with me because I didn't trust James to keep it safe." "So, you're saying you're not my real mother?" Mike asked, grappling with the revelation. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. I tried to be a real mother, but it's clear we don't get along." "Maybe it's because you carry that woman's blood," I said, my voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Mike fell silent, struggling to process the gravity of the revelation. James's voice rose in frustration. "What are you saying? You promised you wouldn't tell Mike." "I don't care about promises. Be grateful for the 24 years I've put up with this," I retorted before ending the call. I blocked both James and Mike and decided to enjoy the rest of my Hawaii trip on my own. After returning to New York before them, I packed up my belongings, moved back into my parents' house, and prepared divorce papers for James. A colleague later informed me of the aftermath of their hot spring trip. They were severely reprimanded by the police for their negligence, and the hotel demanded hefty compensation for the disturbance caused by smoking in a non-smoking room. With my parents' help, they managed to navigate the legal and financial fallout. My divorce from James was finalized smoothly and soon became the topic of office gossip. James's work performance declined, leading to his quiet resignation. He struggled to find new employment, eventually borrowing money from various acquaintances and declaring bankruptcy. Mike's financial and mental stability also deteriorated, leading to constant arguments with Jennifer. As for me, I found solace in the hot springs during my solo trip and now visit several times a year with my parents and friends. My work has flourished, and I've been promoted to head of the accounting department.